Hey everybody, welcome to week number 3 of Film Appreciation. Our last 2 weeks have all been about documentary films, but our second lesson here is going to get us into narrative films. So if documentary films were nonfiction films, narrative films are fiction films. Even if they happen to be about true events, they're fictionalized versions of those true events. We are going to focus on narrative films for the rest of the semester, and each lesson is going to give you a new production element that we cover. Our first production element that we're going to cover, though, is cinematography. So there are a bunch of things that go into cinematography, like camera angles, composition, light, color, if you're going to use like gels or something like that, lenses chosen on the camera, as well as the camera itself, and a plethora of other small details that really influence how a film looks. But to start at the beginning, we'll take a look at compositions. And to break this down in its most simple terms, let's look at shot structures. So we'll start with the widest of our shots, called an extreme long shot or an extreme wide shot. You can use these terms interchangeably, and we will have no problem understanding what you mean here. Now, in an extreme wide shot or an extreme long shot, you're going to see your subject from head to toe completely. You'll also see these types of shots establishing locations very often. That doesn't mean that an establishing shot must be an extreme long shot. We just typically see that type of composition with establishing shots. Now, if you've never heard of the term an establishing shot before, what it does is it establishes a location that appears in the narrative. So, for example, if we're watching something like The Lord of the Rings and we see the Shire in an extreme wide shot or extreme long shot, we get an idea of where we are in time and space for our characters to be interacting. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be the first time we see the Shire and never again. If we come back there in the second or third movies, we may see another wide shot of the Shire before we start like having a couple of characters interact there. And also, it doesn't necessarily need to be an extreme wide shot. It could be a wide shot, or it could even be a close-up if that somehow expresses where we are in space and time. Just generally speaking, extreme long shots oftentimes are establishing shots because you can see so much of the location and environment. So if we're looking at this guy in this space, we can't tell a whole lot about him. We can tell what he's wearing and where he's going, but we don't really know what he's thinking or how he's feeling. Instead, we know a lot more about where he is. So he's in like a cul-de-sac somewhere near maybe a park. So then if we go forward in the scene and he's doing something else, we already know where he is, so we don't need to see much more information about that unless we're introducing something new. Now, if we come in a little bit closer, this is a long shot or a wide shot. So it does essentially the same things that we saw with the extreme long shot or extreme wide shot, except to a lesser extent. So we still have a pretty good idea of where this guy is, of his relationship to his environment, but we know a little bit more about what he's thinking or feeling. We can see more of what's on his face, and we're not just completely reliant on understanding how he's feeling through his body language. Now, it still does the same things. You see your subject from head to toe completely. It still can establish a location pretty well, and it can give clues about the environment too, except the weight is just a little bit different. Where when we saw in the extreme long shot, we give a lot of weight to our location. In the long shot, we give less weight to that and more to the character. If we come in a little bit closer still, we'll be at a medium shot, and there are various medium shots. You can see it framed above or below the hip. We can also see it just a little bit above the knee too. That's what's called a cowboy shot, made famous by westerns where cowboys would have a gun at their hip and you want to be able to see that gun to feel the danger that anyone could pull a gun at any point. But we see movies that aren't westerns use cowboy shots all the time. It's just a nice way to frame up. Likewise, you can frame up a little bit closer than what we're seeing here and a little bit wider than what we're seeing here. Now, this focuses on a specific character. It shows detail with that character. We can certainly tell what this person is thinking or feeling now based on their facial expressions. And it shows the subject the way we often experience person-based personal space concepts. Now, that is a little bit wordy, but basically what this means is if you sit down with a friend and you talk to them in a way that feels comfortable to you, you're probably looking at them in a medium shot. This typically is kind of naturally comfortable for us if we're looking at a person. So when we see people have a bit of dialogue in a narrative film, chances are you're probably going to be seeing them in a medium shot, unless there's something special going on. So we'll skip forward one more, and that is a close-up. Now, from time to time, you will see people speaking in close-up, and that's usually when things are a little more intense. So a close-up shows a lot of detail on his face. We can certainly tell what he's thinking and feeling now. It shows motion well. It's incredibly personal. And in the classic Hollywood shooting and editing style, this one is the last one in the dance. If you don't know what the dance is, we'll get there eventually. And it's not something that's referred to often, but it's helpful for us for this particular presentation. Now, in a close-up, we expect something really intense to be happening. Maybe this character is getting really upset. Maybe it's a really dramatic moment in the film. And that's because we don't usually see people in close-up in real life. That is not what we're accustomed to seeing, unless we're looking at someone we're intimately familiar with. So if you have a significant other that you may kiss on the lips, you might see that person in a close-up from time to time. But even then, you might not see them in a close-up all the time. We generally feel a little more comfortable with some space between us. So then, I generally ask the question, do we introduce characters in close-up in films? Now, sometimes, yes, we do, but that's only to kind of buck the trend of what is common in film. So if you know the rules of a film, you can always break the rules of a film. That said, most films will not introduce a new character in a close-up because it's a little jarring and it's a little uncomfortable for us to see someone for the first time that way. Instead, we'll work our way closer and closer as we get more familiar with a character, and we can jump into those close-ups and utilize them when there's a dramatic moment. Going one further, we have the extreme close-up. Now, these don't always appear in every scene. It's a more rare composition to see, but there are a couple of reasons why you might see it. Very often, you'll see them to show the detail of something small. So if something's really important, but also small, maybe it's my pen writing something on a piece of paper and we need to see the words that are written, we might see that in an extreme close-up. And when we might see a person in an extreme close-up when there's some kind of special effect involved. So that's not to say where like there are explosions or something like that, but instead just an alteration of how we perceive the regular world. So if we're looking at this guy right here, and let's say he's chewing on something, just imagine this scene for a second and imagine how it would sound. If you said that it may sound like boulders crunching together for like the crunching of chips, then I would agree with you. I think that an extreme close-up on people is generally kind of uncomfortable. And if we're seeing something like a mouth, it tends to look a little gross to us because we don't get so close up to strangers to look inside their mouths. You may see an extreme close-up of a mouth if a character has like a migraine headache, they're at work, and they're hearing all of the sounds of work, and it's exaggerated and big and exacerbating their headache. So oftentimes extreme close-ups used for some kind of special effect. So here is that dance of the camera thing that I mentioned before. Now, the idea is in conventional Hollywood standards, we typically see the widest shot introduced first, and then we work our way closer over the course of a scene and how it's edited. So we may see an extreme wide shot, a wide shot, medium close, close-up, and extreme close-up, but not in that order linearly, or it might get too boring and formulaic. So instead, you might see something like extreme wide, wide, medium shot, wide, medium, close, wide, close-up, medium, close, close-up, wide shot, extreme close-up, if that's even present in the scene. So it's kind of like a waltz or a dance. We start at a starting point and end at an ending point, but how we get there is more freestyle. It depends on what you're showing and how you want to express it. So I ask this question at the bottom of the frame: what makes this story so uninteresting? And you may have been thinking about this while I've been talking, but two answers usually come up here. And one is that there is no conflict to the story. If you see this thing playing out as a story, it is kind of boring, and that's because there's no protagonist and antagonist. There may be a protagonist, the guy in the desert here, but there's no antagonistic force. And if you haven't heard of these terms before, a protagonist just means the main character, and an antagonist means opposing force. So it's the thing stopping the protagonist from getting what he or she wants. Now, oftentimes we hear these terms used for a hero and a villain, and that is probably the case if you're watching something like a superhero film. The villain is trying to stop the hero from getting what he or she wants or doing what he or she is supposed to do. Now, in this case, we could say potentially that the desert itself is an antagonistic force if it looked like this guy was going to die of thirst in the desert. So he's trying to survive, and the desert itself, the heat out there, is killing him. So protagonist and antagonistic force. So when you see him and he looks happy the whole way, it doesn't really play as there's any kind of conflict between these two forces. Now, there is a different answer that you may have had, and that is continuity error. Now, if you notice these things, you may be pretty well suited for our editing section, which is coming up. But if I play this thing through as though continuity matters, we have a guy walking through the desert with his backpack and sunglasses. He takes them off, he puts them back on, he takes them off again. That's pretty weird and pretty distracting and jarring, especially if you try to watch something in sequence. So I have some more compositions for you. This is an over-the-shoulder shot. You could also call it a close-up. So not all compositions are mutually exclusive. Things can be blended together. An over-the-shoulder shot just means you're looking over one character's shoulder at a different character. And what does this kind of shot say about the point of view of the viewer? Well, essentially, we feel like we're this guy, and she's looking at this guy, but there's something else going on here, too. We could see the same shot in what would be called a single, meaning she would still be there in a close-up, but this guy would not be within the frame. By including both of them, we establish a connection between the two characters. There's a very literal connection that they are close together, and we can understand the proximity of each character, which character is where in space. So when we flip around, we'll understand how close this guy is to this girl based on what we just saw with this shot. But also there's a more subtle symbolic meaning to this sort of thing, where these two people have an established connection that isn't just like a physical connection where they're just next to each other. Instead, it kind of looks like they're friends or they are romantic partners or something like that. They share the frame together, meaning that there's some kind of harmony there. Now, if we saw them both in singles, that could just be that they are just meeting, or maybe they aren't friends. But this is not an all-encompassing rule. So it certainly depends on what kind of film you're watching and what the filmmakers chose. But typically we do see that kind of thing when they choose whether or not to use an over-the-shoulder shot or a single in their edit. So this is a two-shot. Essentially, a two-shot just shows two people within the frame. This could be a close-up like what you're seeing here, or a medium shot. Two-shot includes two people. A three-shot would include three people. Beyond basic composition, we have frame movement. How we can move the frame that you're seeing, we can do that in various ways. So you can move the lens itself, meaning that if you have a certain type of lens, you can move from a wide shot to a close-up in a single shot without moving the camera itself. This would be called a zoom in. Likewise, you can zoom out if you want to move from maybe like a close-up to a wide shot or anything in between. You can also move the camera itself, and you can move the camera in a few different ways. If it's on a tripod, meaning like a stand for a camera, tripod meaning 3 legs stand, you can pan it, meaning basically like pivoting left and right, or you can tilt, pivoting up and down, or you can move the mounting. Essentially, you're moving the camera again, but this time moving in a different way. So if you move the camera by putting the camera on a set of wheels and moving it in and out, that would be called a dolly in or a dolly out. Likewise, you can dolly left, dolly right. You can do a radial dolly, dollying in a circle. There are many types of dollies. Essentially, any way that you can move on a set of wheels, there is some kind of dolly movement for that. So this is the Cartesian coordinate system, which you don't really need to know about, but it helps us understand some things with camera movement. So if we're moving on the x-axis, we have the options here for a pan. You can pan left, pan right if you're on a tripod, or you can dolly left, dolly right if you're on wheels. Now, the y direction, we can tilt up and tilt down on a tripod, or we can do what's called a jib or a crane shot, meaning that the camera is on essentially like a big arm that can lift high into the sky or come down from the sky to somewhere down low. Now, if we are moving in the Z direction, we have a couple options here. We could be dollying in or dollying out, or we could be zooming in or zooming out using the lens. So let's take a quick look at these things in motion. This is what's called a tilt. We are tilting up. That means that the camera's on a tripod and it's pivoting upward. So this is what's called a pan, meaning that the camera, again, is on a tripod. Since the shot is reversed, it looks as though we're panning left with the characters, but really, when we were actually shooting it, we were panning right, and it looked like that. This is a dolly in, so the camera is moving inward. Now, it says tracking in here, and tracking just means that you're tracking a particular subject. So in this case, I guess you could call it a track if you're tracking something that is like this plant here, but it's sort of stationary, so I wouldn't really call it that. I'd call it a dolly in. This is a dolly out. It's just going in the opposite direction. And instead, this is a much better example of a tracking shot since we're tracking a single subject. Now we are on wheels again here, so this is a dolly right, meaning that the camera is moving in the right direction. Now this is a dolly left, just meaning that the camera is moving in the left direction, but also on wheels here as well. Here is a jib shot. Again, that's one of those arms that can lift up into the air, and you should be able to perceive that the camera is actually lifting upward and not just pivoting on an axis. This is another tracking shot. It can be called a follow shot as well. So a specific kind of tracking shot, following from behind. You can also follow from in front of a subject, but it just means that you're following a subject as they're walking around. This is a handheld shot. The previous one was handheld as well. Handheld just means that the camera is being held in someone's hands. Now, there are some options to make a handheld shot look a lot more stabilized. And if you do something like that, use a steady cam or a gimbal or any other kind of stabilization outside of just your hands holding it, the shot is then more classified by the thing that's stabilizing it. So rather than calling it a handheld shot, you may call it a gimbal shot or a Steadicam shot. All right, so let's talk about lenses really quickly. This shot here was shot with what's called a telephoto lens. These are focal lengths with higher numbers. The higher the number, the more telephoto your lens actually is. Now, these are also called long lenses, which can become a little confusing considering that we had long shots before that have nothing to do with long lenses. Now, a long shot you can get with a wide angle lens or a long lens or telephoto lens. Let's just call it telephoto so that we don't get confused by it. So telephoto lens is typically thought of to be more of a close-up lens because the more telephoto your lens is, the more, for lack of a better term, zoomed in the image appears to be. So we can be further back from our subject and still get them in a close-up, whereas with a wider lens, we'd need to move the camera closer to our subject to see them. Now, what's actually going on with these lenses, a telephoto lens is more compressed in terms of space, everything looks more flattened. So we know just by context how long a city street is, and we can see that we see almost the entirety of a city street with this shot right here. And if we look at the other side of the spectrum, wide angle lenses, we can see that it sort of expands space, or appears to expand space. So contextually, knowing how long a city street is versus how long a bus is, we know that the bus is shorter than the city street. But if we look at these two things back to back, we can see that they almost look the same length. Right? If we have no context for how big this space actually is, just looking at these two images, they look to be about the same size. But it's a bit of trickery with the lenses that's going on here. So typically, we see telephoto lenses not used for wide shots because we like to see people more with these telephoto lenses rather than environments. We could see much more of this environment with a wide angle lens. So let's look at how this applies to a person's face. We can see telephoto lenses starting at about 85 millimeters. So if we looked at this 100, 135, and 200, we're certainly in that telephoto range. And then wide angle lenses at this 35 and 24, both of these certainly in the wide angle range. Now, what you'll notice right away is the features of the face appear elongated, and the head itself seems more rounded in the wide angle version here versus the telephoto, where the features of the face feel much more flattened. But if you look a little bit closer, you can notice some other things too. We didn't change where the subject is in relation to the background for any of these shots, but you can certainly see how the background appears to be much smaller in these latter two shots. So we can actually see the edges of the backdrop even in the 35 millimeter, and then you can really see it in the 24 where you can see the green screen behind that backdrop as well. Again, it's just the appearance of expansion of space. So it seems as though the space is much longer between the subject and the background. Even the subject's nose and the cheeks appear to be longer in this 24 millimeter, whereas in the 200 millimeter, that seems much more flattened down. We see much less of the backdrop this way. Here's another interesting compositional element, the rule of thirds. And essentially what it says is you split the image in thirds, both horizontally and vertically, and where these lines would intersect are areas where we generally tend to look when presented with an empty frame. So if this guy was not in the frame at all and he's going to walk into the frame, where we might expect the camera to start panning and following the character is right when he hits either here or here. Positive and negative space, just to make sure that you understand this stuff before we get into the next couple of slides. Positive space is the chair. So the negative space is everything around the chair itself. So you have a subject and you have a background, pretty evident, but I'm going to challenge you just a little bit with that in 1 second. So this appears to be full of positive space. You don't really have much of a background, but I would challenge this and say you certainly do. It appears to be that at first glance. I'm not sure if this is potatoes or peaches or what it is, but chances are one of these fruit or vegetable items stands out to you, and you probably said it's this guy right here. And you probably said that for a couple of reasons. One is it's the most in focus. So if you look at some of these other fruit items back here, they are out of focus or blurry, where this one looks much more sharp in contrast. And then the other thing is compositionally. Nothing's in front of it really, and it stands out to you as the most important one. We give it plenty of weight. We see it in its entirety. All of those things make us look at this one over all of the others. If someone was going to reach in and grab one of these, which one do you think they would grab? Probably this one here. Conversely, we can have a whole lot of negative space in our image. So if I asked you what the negative space is here, you would think it's the desert, but there still is a subject here. It's the camels and the person, and chances are you looked at that right away before you started looking all over at the desert here. When presented with minimalistic images, you'll look at the thing that is the subject a little bit quicker than you would otherwise. Now we have camera angles here. Imagine that the camera is on this side of the circle here and the subject is right here. So if we have the camera pointed right here at the subject across a neutral view, meaning that the camera is neither lower than the subject or above the subject, that is not something that you oftentimes see in a narrative film because it has really no effective response. Instead, we might see a very minimalistic high angle view or a low angle view if you don't want it to be too dramatic, but you still want some kind of emotive response. We want to understand what we're supposed to feel about a character based on all of our production elements, including cinematography and including angles. So with a narrative, almost certainly you're seeing either a high view or a low view. Now, there is extreme versions of this stuff. A bird's eye view means the camera is up very high, pointed down at your subject. And there's an even more extreme version called a God's eye view, meaning that the camera is pointed straight down, like in a straight line down at your subject. So you're kind of looking at the tops of their heads unless they're looking straight up towards the camera. The extreme version of a low view or low angle view is a worm's eye view, meaning that the camera is down low, basically at floor level, pointed up at the subject, and it makes the subject look more like a giant or large within the frame. Now, I always like to ask the question of what kinds of people do you see in high angle views versus low angle views? And in a high angle view, you might see someone who's smaller than you, who's shorter than you. Typically what we hear is children. You see children in high angle views. If you're an adult walking around in the world, that's the type of person you might see there. If you were looking at a child in real life, you probably have the idea that you are more powerful than that child, and the same thing applies to film. Now we can see someone who is taller than us in a high angle view, but that makes them seem a little less powerful in this moment. Now in a low angle view, we typically see our superheroes. The superhero angle is a low angle shot at a superhero. Low angle makes them seem powerful. Now if they're in an area where they're getting beat up or they're in some kind of jeopardy, you might see that same superhero in a high angle view in that situation, just to convey that they're less powerful in this moment. So here is an example of something that's close to eye level, but not quite that. So at first glance, you may say, that's pretty neutral, and it creates not much of an effective response, meaning that you don't feel much about this character outside of the fact that it's maybe like a close-up and we're familiar with the character. We're not supposed to feel like he's excessively powerful or weakened in this moment, but I would still say that it's not quite a neutral angle. Instead, it's a slight low angle. Hopefully you're able to see that, but it's sort of like chin level or maybe nose level rather than eye level. That's probably or making him feel more important to the story. And indeed he is. He's the main character of the film. Now, here we have a high angle, and if you're familiar with who this guy is, it's 007, so he's the hero of the film and typically a pretty powerful character. But if we look at this shot, just in a glance, we know immediately that he is not in a good spot. He is jeopardized. He is in danger. And whether or not you get that from the angle is up to interpretation. I like this shot a lot because just by looking at it, you know exactly how you're supposed to feel about it. You may not know exactly what's going on with the story, but you know essentially how this guy's feeling and how we should feel about him. He is weakened. He is in danger. Now, it could come from the high angle shot and very likely does to an extent, but all of our production elements are telling us the same thing. And that's the beauty of storytelling language in film. So we can see high angle shot is doing something for us, but also the makeup is doing something for us. We can see this little blood splatter on his head here. He looks pretty sweaty. He has some blood on his nose and his knuckles here. Something's happening with the wardrobe as well. He's in a suit, but like the buttons are undone. He has some dirt on his suit here as well. The performance is telling us something too. His eyes are wide open, and if you know anything about guns and weapons, you're only supposed to put your finger on the trigger when you're ready to shoot. So we know specifically that he is ready to fire his weapon right now. Production design, we can see that there's a big brick wall behind him, and compositionally, we don't see like a door or exit path anywhere on the sides of him, so it feels like he's cornered or back into a wall, and a wall that he can't climb over or break through. So just by looking at it, you know what's going on. If you didn't get it from the cinematography, you got it from the production design. If not from there, you got it from the makeup. If not from there, you got it from the performance. If not from there, you got it from the wardrobe. All of these things tell us something, and it tells us something that we're so intimately familiar with that we can understand a story in just a single image. Really impressive stuff. Here's a different example of a camera angle. This is a low angle. I don't know that I'd call it a worm's eye view. It does appear to be kind of like floor level, so you could make that argument. But if it was a little closer to our subject, it would be much more that super low angle worm's eye view. Now, what this is supposed to make you feel is that a character is in a position of power, but this particular shot is trying to go against the grain here. So where all of these production elements for 007 harmonize, these sort of clash. So even though we're accustomed to seeing low angles making a subject appear powerful, in this case, there are other things that make him seem weakened. And that, for the most part, is the performance. The reaction that he has makes him seem less powerful in this moment. So you may feel a more complicated reaction to an image like this versus the 007 image, where this one, you have no question about what you're supposed to feel. This one questions how you're supposed to feel. Finally, I'm just going to throw one more in here because it was involved with our 007 image as well as genre pictures, since I feel like some of you may decide to choose a horror film, since so many people are interested in horror films. The canted angle or Dutch angle just means that the shot is off kilter or off balance. We can see that it appears like it's tilted sideways. So we can see our background here tilted downward and our subject likewise tilted. Now, whether or not you use canted angle or Dutch angle sort of depends on whether or not you are a film studies person or a film production person. If you ever set foot on a set and say, let's do a canted angle on this, chances are people will look at you a little bit funny. If you say a Dutch angle, you'll never see that weird look. Now, if you are going to pick up a film studies textbook, like if you had a textbook for this film appreciation class, very likely in that textbook they would have mentioned canted angle and not Dutch angle for it. Why it is separated like this, I'm not really sure. It's just been my personal experience teaching both things and being on sets and also writing about films. So what does this do for us? It makes something seem off, odd, or bizarre. If you see a shot start with a more neutral angle and then become Dutch over time, that means that probably a character is going crazy or something very strange is happening in this very moment. Likewise, with any of our compositions, we can actually change that composition through camera movement. We can either just cut to a new composition entirely, cut away for a second and cut back, and now we're in a new composition, or we can move the camera from one composition to another. If you ever see these types of camera movements from one composition to another, that just means that in this moment, something is happening. So if we think of a medium shot, meaning that it's a more casual way to see a character, versus a close-up, meaning a more intimate way to see a character, and we move from that medium shot to a close-up over time, that means in this moment we're becoming more intimate with the character. Oftentimes you'll see that very movement used for something like an interrogation scene where a character is making a confession. We'll start in that medium shot or even a wide shot, and over the course of the confession we get closer and closer to the character. So that's it for our presentation. Hopefully this has been illustrative in how to identify specific aspects of cinematography. Now, a problem that I oftentimes see with people's blog posts and writing in general when they try to write about cinematography in a film is they'll identify that a film has several wide shots or the film has several medium shots. And that is just not that interesting. Almost every film will have several medium shots and long shots. Instead, look for something that jumps out to you as the viewer. If a shot seems particularly interesting for one reason or another, use these terms to describe it, to articulate it, and then use the terms to describe how it's different than what you're used to seeing or how it's effective for telling the story that it's attempting to tell. That is a much better approach when we're trying to analyze cinematography and narrative films than speaking more generally about the film as a whole or compositions that you see oftentimes within the film. That's not to say that you can't do that if the film approaches cinematography in a really unique manner. If the film is entirely handheld, that is notable. If the film appears to be one long take with no cuts, that is certainly notable too. And how the camera moves from one composition to another is very interesting to us. Now, again, these are entirely up to the films that you decide to choose for cinematography. In our announcements, again, I'll put a list of suggested films and hopefully have a few links for you, and you'll be able to choose something that's on some kind of streaming platform, including a free one, if you don't have access to paid subscription video on demand. Now, I will ask this week that you choose something from that list because I can be relatively certain if you choose from that list, you'll have plenty of ammunition to come at your blog post for cinematography. I would ask that you watch a trailer for the film that you choose before you actually choose that film, and make your choice not just based on the content of the film, oh, this is an action film and I like action films, but rather the cinematography that you see present in that trailer. So good luck this week. Now, if you have any questions about this particular presentation, feel free to email me or talk to me in the discussions area. Maybe you didn't understand something about composition, lenses, optics, movement, any of that stuff. Happy to explain it in further detail if you need that sort of thing. But otherwise, enjoy your choice of films, and I hope you choose something that you find interesting enough to write about in detail. All right, I'll be speaking with you all in a couple of weeks with our next lesson.